guys, now I know what it feels to be between somebody and his taxi. I'm going to keep this as short as possible and try and talk about, in some ways, nothing you've heard all day. In some ways, everything you've heard all day. Just depends on your point of view. I'm going to try and concentrate on creativity and what changes are taking place, what changes are to be expected in creativity in years to come. And in Hindi, the word for yesterday is kal, and the word for tomorrow is kal. And and it sort of describes that many of the things we spoke about are, the past coming back in new ways, and you have to understand the new ways. I'm going to start by saying, a couple of the speakers before mentioned Polaroid in passing, and I was fascinated where 8 or 9 months ago, Kodak, the creator of the Kodak moment, defining photography, had the best brains on the planet to do with photography, held all the best patents on it, dominated the world, and then went through a series of chapters of what they call bankruptcy to land up at vulture patent stage 8 or 9 months ago. Okay? These things happen, companies die, like VHS or whatever. Around the same time, Polaroid, a little younger than Kodak, but instead of defining photography, they defined instant. And they too wended their weary way to nothingness, series of bankruptcies, come down to a shell with a few patents, picked over, and that's the end of them. Now that's not surprising. Companies die, that's fine. However, in the same quarter that those two companies went to the wall, a company with 35 people, 18 months old, whose core business appeared to be to make Kodak look like Polaroid, got bought for $1 billion. Okay? Now, what gives? Okay? Now, the good news or the bad news is that's today, and that's not what I'm going to talk about, but that gives you the nature of the change, because what Instagram did was to say it was important not to know its product, but to know its customers. And more importantly, one of the themes you saw come through in pretty much all the speakers up to now, that one of the key changes is interactivity. It's not just that you have to know your customers, but your customers knew your customers. Okay? These relationships were group effects of customers being able to talk to customers. And that change is profound. Right? It's like saying that price obscurity is dead in most businesses because the cost of finding out what the person next to you paid for his plane seat, his hotel room, his IT contract, it doesn't matter. It's discoverable much more easily than it's ever been before. And that creates all kinds of ways. And so when people talk about social, right, I think of social as a filter first, because I use my network to recommend. Why should I believe a celebrity when I can trust people I've known for a while who know me, who know my context, and I know their domain knowledge. And I can be granular. It's like saying, I trust Tiger Woods perhaps for the golf ball he uses. I may consider but won't trust him on what kind of watch he wears, and I definitely won't go to him for marital advice. Okay? So it's no longer a case that you accept somebody as an expert in many things, because we can be granular. If that is the change today, where is the change that is going forward that is going to completely transform our own creativity? And that's what I want to talk about right now by bringing in how 3D printers are changing the world, but what that actually means. When I first heard about a 3D printer, and I'm a retarded hippie, I'm a deadhead, the first thing I could think about was, wow, I can now fax a vinyl album to a friend. Okay? And guess what? I've got 2 3D printers at home. I haven't yet got the scanner to the right level, and it doesn't matter that the technology isn't capable of giving any of the fidelity I need. Right? All I want to do is prove the point that instead of sending text, which was done when we had telegrams, instead of sending image, which was done when we had fax, we can now send objects. I have seen smells sent from one side of the room to the other across a wire. Because if you can take something and express it in mathematical terms, pass it into a device that transfers those electrical signals to somewhere else, where you now have a device that's capable of taking those instructions and creating hard objects. That is a world that we may have dreamt of, but I can really think of situations where it's not just about sending LPs, because that's just fun, because the copyright guys would die trying to figure out what's possible there or not. IP starts looking very different when you are participative. But the way I think about it, we as a community, we as mankind, have finally got the right to take back the word manufacturing. Okay, you know what manufacturing meant? Go look up a dictionary. It meant making by hand. Okay, manu, the hand, facture, making. So in the 16th century, when the word first entered our vocabularies, it meant making by hand. We were all makers. Sometime over the next 200 years, as we move towards the Industrial Revolution, it suddenly changed to saying doing something at scale and not necessarily by hand, by mechanical power. Right? And we lost something of our humanity in that, because the mechano maker, the person who wants to get under the hood, the person who wants to be able to cook rather than buy a frozen dish, the person in all of us that was capable of creating things was being moved into a broadcast-controlled, you cannot do anything nonsense. And if you actually think about what's happening in the last 30 years, you could turn around and say the first generation of compute was our ability to consume structured information. And then some while later, we started having spreadsheets and PowerPoint and Word and stuff like that. We could produce structured information. When things like the web came along and you had search engines, you could start consuming unstructured information, probabilistic rather than deterministic access. And then when blogs and wikis and IM and social network came along, we could start producing unstructured information. Now we all have the power to be able to do things in text and image and sound, and that is disrupting all kinds of hell, as the previous speakers have spoken to you about. Right? You ain't seen nothing yet. Because the real disruption that comes is when every one of us becomes individual manufacturers. Okay? And that's nowhere near as far away. 3D printers are now available at $500, $600, okay, to have in your home. The materials may not be that good as yet, but they're good enough to be able to produce skull fragments in case you've had a skull fracture and you need it. We've started printing organs. If you want to really see the end of organ trading as something humanity should not see, the possibility that we are going to be able to print organs is absolutely amazing using stem cell research. It's gone beyond that to saying, when I first heard about it, I said, is this vanity? People are making shoes out of it, putting, iPhone sort of sleeves into their boots. Right? People are finding ways of printing jigsaw puzzle pieces they've forgotten, or maybe short-term, screws or bolts for something where a piece is either missing or not there. So people were prototyping, creating transient objects. This doesn't sound like anything serious. Until I started researching into it and I found out that, the first use that sort of hit me hard on the forehead and I sat down and said, wow, I have to do something about this, was when I found out that 3D printing was being used today and has been used for about 4 or 5 years as a technique to deal with cleft palate surgery for babies. Okay? Until recently, the most invasive, painful use of metal spikes and vices had to be around the jaws of babies that were days old in order to try and correct their cleft palates. Right? I believe that every one of us would agree that babies have the right to smile. Right? Every human being, whatever rights we don't agree with, having the right to smile is not a bad thing to aim for. And the idea that this technology was able to create non-invasive, no surgery needed almost, very light cuts across the lip, but you reposition the whole jaw and the angle of the mouth and everything else by having 30 prints of very gentle transfers, and each day you would just put the new insert in and the move would take place, or each couple of days or whatever else. It had to be done under supervision. But suddenly, 3D printing was about making huge impacts on lives, because if the one thing that a 3D printer could do was to make sure that no child ever had to have an operation to do with cleft palate and it could be corrected and that child could smile, I would think it's worth doing. But actually, it doesn't stop there. That is the beginning. And that beginning, now that metals have started getting into it, the whole process is based on additive manufacturing rather than subtractive. So you don't chisel pieces away, you don't grind, you don't file, you don't start with a big thing and make it smaller. You start with a small thing and make it bigger. And we're learning a lot about the materials. We're creating new chemicals, we're creating new materials as we go on, and each day it's getting better and better. So the scientist in me said, I need to somehow find a stupid reason to make this scale, because once it scales and we all get involved and we think like we thought in the mid-80s about fax machines, it's available, I want to have one, it's going to be at home because it's cheap. And it's going to happen, not just in my lifetime, it's going to happen in a couple of years. We're that close to it, right? What I found out was, since I wanted to find, and I was looking for a way to transform the use of 3D printing in everyday lives, something trivial that everybody would have to deal with needed to be found. And that trivial thing was the mobile phone. Okay? Nokia, whom I had given up any hope of their coming out, the traditional market name for their platform when Nokia combined with Microsoft Windows was no win. Okay? And that sort of set the tone. All right? And I was expecting nothing to come out of there whatsoever. Then somewhere within the dark recesses of that company that was, struggling, a bunch of engineers said, you know what, we're going to take the specs of every one of our phone handsets and give it out to the world in files that can be 3D printed so that individuals could design little cases, customize them, do what they like at home. Okay? Now that's a tiny, blade of grass, because there are one or two people who have mobile phones in the world and one or two people who might start doing things like that. But once the movement begins and you start having people saying, I'm going to provide a specification, and that specification can be used by people at home to do something, this is like recipes, right? This is like giving people the right to publish, to film, and all kinds of laws are going to have to be built as we try to figure that out. When I send somebody a spec and he prints it at home, is it going to be safe? Safe for children? Safe in terms of fire? Safe in terms of the material used? What is the equivalent of a libel or slander law that has to be found in publication terms? What is the equivalent of food safety laws that have to be found? There's a lot that changes when every one of us has the individual ability to print at home and to print almost at will. And like we use recipes for cooking and there's nothing sort of hung on to it, what we're going to find is that a lot of the creativity, going back to the design discussions we were having, right, is going to start with saying creativity is in good design, good enough for you to be able to transmit to people and for them to be able to modify while still being safe. Okay? That requires a lot of thought, because every specification for almost any product on earth, you don't have to manufacture anymore. Manufacturing will take place in the home. But for it to take place in the home, the creativity takes place at two levels. One, the spec that is the platform. Two, the individual at the edge who can mutate that spec every which way, add to it, in the same way as every one of us do with recipes today. Okay? That process has already begun. File transfer of, effectively 3D specifications of many objects are now being sent around. You need something that looks like a laboratory where that spec can be, field tested before it goes out. You need to understand the constraints under which that spec is going to operate. Right? These are not trivial. And the more I thought about it, and that's what I want to sort of leave you with thinking, is a creation process that needs to be able to say, I'm going to do something in a laboratory, I need to have experimented with all the ingredients possible, come up with a set of relatively safe environments, and then publicize and propagate those environments for people to be able to use at home, while they do their layer of transformation, of creation, of innovation with it. Right? That world needs to have something that has already gone through those kind of environments. Now, when Sean was having the fireside chat, one of the words that kept coming through was iteration. Right? In order to be able to do this, we need to have a very strong model for iteration within the creative process. Right? You carry on saying, what have I learned? How do I run through it again? What can I refine? I have not failed. I found 10,000 ways that do not work. And to put that model into place, I was trying to find an industry that has shown the resilience and the ability to do that. An industry I don't much like, but boy, are they resilient. Hollywood, okay? The film industry, first, but within 10 years of being born, had to be slapped in the face with sound. Before they recovered from sound, they were hit by color. By the time they got used to color, they were hit by television. By the time they got used to TV, along came cable. Along came VHS. Along came the DVD. Along came streaming. They have never been allowed to settle, which is why they've constantly been adaptive. They may have done things in that adaptation for survival that I may not approve of, but they've shown me how an industry is to be resilient. So I thought I'm going to borrow for them. And in borrowing, I want to leave you with the idea that we're going to move into a future where design is done in studios. A few people in the design team will be stars who bring some sort of super creativity in there. The rest will be a production crew. Manufacturing will be done in genres. And each genre will be exactly like learning a film script. Those scripts will then be transmitted using a variety of business models into individual hands at the home. And we can, unlike television and broadcast models, mutate those scripts at will at home, all done with a level of learning that the open source movement has best sort of reflected. If you're going to use something, you're going to take your learning and contribute it back to the community. Okay? This is not 10 years forward, this is not 15 years forward. It has happened now. Scripts are already being changed, the specification, the design files, the 360 views and the scans are being moved around now. Right? There are probably, when you talked about 4 people in this room amongst the 25, how many people in this room have seen a 3D printer? Okay. About 2/3, maybe 3/4. How many have one? Okay. Sorry? Okay. We got about 4 hands. Okay. Watch this question in a year's time, wherever this thing takes place. Okay. That revolution, allowing every one of us to do what we used to be able to do 600 years ago, have crafts and trades and skills that allowed us to make things under our own power, rather than get high volume pap from somebody else you don't know, from a place you don't know, right? How did we ever land up in a place where you can't figure out how much horse meat there is in a burger, okay? Right? That's the alternative to taking back our right to manufacture, because the tools are there. And it's not just manufacturing anything, Some of the conversations I'm having at the dinner table saying the same truth is there for financial instruments. The same truth is there for banking products. The same, APIs will have to exist, ways of individuals being able to design at the edge for their own purposes, to share that learning and to put it back. Creativity has never known the power that it's got today. I'm glad to be alive, and thank you for your time.